Why do some people command respect effortlessly, while others struggle no matter what they do? You might think respect is about achievements, status, or charisma, but legendary psychologist Carl Jung revealed a deeper truth. It's not about what you add to your life, it's about what you remove. The most respected people aren't just impressive, they've mastered the art of shedding toxic habits that silently sabotage their dignity. Carl Jung, one of history's most influential psychologists, believed that true respect begins with self-awareness. His work exposed how unconscious behaviors, like denial, insecurity, and self-deception, erode not just how others see us, but how we see ourselves. When we ignore these patterns, we unknowingly push people away, no matter how hard we try to impress them. In this video, we'll break down the 7 destructive habits Jung warned about, habits that make you seem untrustworthy, insecure, or even manipulative without you realizing it. Some might shock you. Others will hit too close to home. But if you remove even a few, you'll notice a profound shift in how people treat you. Habit 1. Living through projections. One of the most revealing yet uncomfortable truths Carl Jung uncovered was our tendency to project our own hidden flaws onto others. He called this psychological defense mechanism projection, where we unconsciously disown the traits we dislike in ourselves and instead see them in everyone around us. It's easier to point fingers than to face our own shortcomings, but this habit silently erodes respect. People may not always call it out directly, but they sense when someone refuses accountability, and over time, trust erodes. A classic example is someone who constantly complains about others being arrogant or self-centered, not realizing that their own deep-seated insecurity is what's fueling their irritation. The more they deny their own pride or need for validation, the more they fixate on it in others. Jung warned that until we confront these projections, we remain trapped in cycles of blame, never truly growing, and never earning genuine respect, because people instinctively distrust those who refuse to look inward. So how do we break this pattern? The first step is brutal self-honesty. Next time you feel a strong negative reaction towards someone, especially if it's a recurring theme, pause and ask, could this be something I dislike about myself? It's not easy, but the moment you take responsibility instead of projecting, something shifts. People begin to see you as self-aware, grounded, and trustworthy. Respect isn't about being perfect. It's about having the courage to face what's imperfect within you. This habit is just the beginning. The deeper we go, the more we uncover how these unconscious behaviors hold us back, not just in how others perceive us, but in how we move through the world. And the next habit is one nearly everyone falls into without realizing the damage it causes. Habit 2. Seeking external validation. Carl Jung had a profound understanding of how easily we lose ourselves in the pursuit of being liked. He called this false social mask the persona, the carefully crafted version of ourselves we present to the world in hopes of gaining approval. The problem isn't adapting to social situations. It's when we become so identified with this facade that we forget who we truly are beneath it. Jung warned that the more we rely on external validation, the more hollow we become, trading authenticity for acceptance. And here's the paradox. The very people we're trying to impress can sense this lack of inner stability, making respect harder to earn. When your sense of worth depends on others' opinions, you unknowingly signal insecurity. Every exaggerated laugh at an unfunny joke, every agreement when you secretly disagree, every time you downplay your needs to avoid rocking the boat, you teach people that your boundaries are negotiable. This doesn't make you likable. It makes you predictable, even disposable. Needing constant approval is like handing others an invisible leash, giving them power over your emotions. And people, whether consciously or not, respect those less who seem to need their validation too much. The alternative isn't arrogance or indifference, it's rooted self-assurance. Jung believed true respectability comes from individuation, the process of integrating all parts of yourself, even the messy ones, into a cohesive whole. When you stop seeking validation, something unexpected happens. People start seeking your approval. They lean in when you speak, trust your judgment more, and value your presence. Not because you've learned to manipulate their perceptions, but because you've become someone who doesn't need to. This shift begins with small but deliberate acts of self-honesty. Notice where you're performing rather than expressing. Catch yourself when you're about to say something just for applause. Practice silence when you'd usually scramble to fill it with people-pleasing chatter. Each time you choose authenticity over approval, you reinforce an unshakable foundation. And ironically, the less you chase respect, the more effortlessly it finds you. But shedding the persona is only part of the battle. There's an even deeper layer of self-deception that, when ignored, quietly undermines every relationship and aspiration, and it's one most people spend their entire lives running from. Habit 3. Avoiding shadow work. Carl Jung's most unsettling yet transformative idea was that of the shadow, the repressed, denied parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. These aren't just minor flaws we're aware of and try to improve, they're the aspects of our psyche we've disowned, buried so deep we often don't even recognize they exist. Yet, like a hidden current beneath still waters, the shadow controls more of our behavior than we'd like to admit. Every outburst of irrational anger, every moment of envy disguised as indifference, every manipulative impulse dressed up as concern, these aren't random lapses in character. They're the shadow demanding to be seen. And the more we ignore it, the more it controls us from the darkness. This avoidance comes at a steep cost to respect. People might not consciously pinpoint why they distrust someone, but they instinctively recoil from those whose words and actions don't align. The colleague who preaches fairness but always angles for special favors, the friend who condemns gossip yet always has a whispered, "just between us," story, their denial of these contradictions doesn't make them appear virtuous, only hypocritical. Jung argued that until we confront our shadow, we remain fragmented, presenting a polished image while our unconscious impulses leak out in ways that erode trust. The path to genuine respect isn't perfection, but wholeness, the courage to say, "This, too, is part of me." So how do we integrate the shadow without being consumed by it? The first step is ruthless observation. For 1 week, keep a shadow journal. Each night, note moments when you reacted disproportionately, sudden resentment, unjustified judgments, petty thoughts you'd never voice. Don't judge them, map them. Patterns will emerge. Next, practice conscious expression in safe ways. If your shadow harbors aggression, channel it into competitive sports or assertive boundary setting rather than passive aggression. If it's greed, deliberately practice generosity while acknowledging the discomfort it brings. The goal isn't to indulge these impulses, but to drain their power by bringing them into the light. This work is uncomfortable, but its rewards are immeasurable. As you integrate your shadow, you'll notice people respond to you differently, not because you've become saintly, but because you've become real. There's an unmistakable magnetism in those who've made peace with their darkness. They don't waste energy pretending, and that integrity commands respect effortlessly. Yet shadow work alone isn't enough if we're still trapped in the most seductive lie of all, the belief that life happens to us rather than through us. And that brings us to the next habit, one that masquerades as innocence while quietly robbing you of power. Habit 4. Playing the victim. Carl Jung observed that one of the most insidious barriers to self-respect and respect from others is what he called neurotic victimhood, the habitual stance of seeing oneself as powerless, perpetually wronged by life. This isn't about genuine suffering or trauma, but rather a reflexive posture of complaint and blame that becomes a substitute for agency. Jung warned that when we indulge this mindset, We don't just portray ourselves as victims. We become them, trapped in a self-created prison where every circumstance confirms our helplessness. The tragedy is that this stance often begins as a bid for sympathy, yet ends up repelling the very respect we crave. There's a reason chronic complaining drains the energy from rooms and relationships. When someone consistently frames themselves as life's punching bag, blaming bosses, partners, or the system for their unhappiness without taking meaningful action, they unconsciously signal they're not to be taken seriously. People might offer pity initially, but pity is the antithesis of respect. Worse, victimhood is contagious. It drags others into its orbit by demanding they either participate in the grievance or become yet another oppressor to resent. This is why even well-intentioned friends eventually withdraw from serial victims, not out of cruelty, but self-preservation. Breaking free requires what Jung called individuation, the conscious reclaiming of authorship over one's life. This begins with a simple but revolutionary question: where am I benefiting from my own victim story? Perhaps it absolves you of responsibility, garners temporary attention, or justifies stagnation. Recognizing these payoffs is uncomfortable but necessary. Next, practice alchemical reframing. Transform grievances into diagnostics. Instead of, "my boss overlooks me because he's unfair," ask, "what skills or visibility could I build to become undeniable?" This isn't about denying real obstacles, but refusing to let them define you. The shift from victim to creator is neither quick nor linear, but each small act of agency compounds. You'll notice people's tones change, less placating, more engaging. Opportunities arise where you once saw dead ends. Not because the world has become kinder, but because you've become sturdier. And in that sturdiness lies an unspoken invitation for others to meet you at a higher level. Yet even this transformation remains incomplete if we continue to commit the most socially sanctioned form of self-betrayal, one so normalized we often mistake it for virtue. Habit 5. Being dishonest with yourself. Carl Jung's concept of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who we truly are, requires something most people spend their lives avoiding: brutal, unrelenting self-honesty. We lie to ourselves more than we lie to anyone else, crafting elaborate narratives to justify our fears, our laziness, our compromises. These aren't the obvious lies we consciously tell, but the subtle ones woven into our daily thinking. "I'm too busy to pursue my passion. This relationship isn't that bad. I'll change when the timing is right." Jung warned that every time we swallow these half-truths, we don't just deceive ourselves, we fracture our integrity at the deepest level. And people can smell this fracture, even if they can't name it. The cost of self-deception is credibility, both with others and ourselves. Consider the manager who claims to value transparency but withholds information to maintain control, or the partner who insists they're committed while emotionally checking out. Their words ring hollow not because their intentions are malicious, but because their actions betray an inner division they refuse to acknowledge. This creates what Jung called a psychic civil war, where enormous energy is wasted maintaining facades rather than building authentic power. The tragedy is that we think we're preserving our dignity with these little lies, when in truth we're eroding the very foundation of self-respect that makes genuine dignity possible. The magic of this practice isn't in the writing itself, but in the moments of uncomfortable recognition that follow, the cringe of seeing your rationalizations spelled out in ink. Over time, these small confrontations build what Jung called psychological muscle, the capacity to tolerate difficult truths without crumbling or constructing new defenses. This path isn't for the faint-hearted. You'll discover parts of yourself that are petty, cowardly, or selfish. But you'll also uncover reserves of strength and authenticity you didn't know you possessed. And paradoxically, as you become more honest about your flaws, people will begin trusting you more, not less. because they sense you've stopped hiding from them and from yourself. Yet even this profound work reaches its limits if we remain trapped in what Jung saw as modernity's greatest psychological trap, the delusion that we can think our way out of problems we need to feel our way through. Habit 7. Fear of solitude. Carl Jung pierced through one of modernity's greatest paradoxes when he observed that loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. But he took this further. The deepest loneliness springs from abandoning yourself, from becoming so estranged from your own inner life that you turn others into emotional crutches. This fear of solitude manifests in subtle yet destructive ways. The compulsive need to fill every silent moment with chatter, the panic when left alone with your thoughts, the way social media becomes a numbing agent against self-reflection. What begins as discomfort with being alone gradually morphs into a kind of emotional vampirism, where you unconsciously drain others' energy because you've never learned to generate your own. This dependency erodes respect in ways we rarely anticipate. The colleague who constantly seeks reassurance before making decisions, the friend who morphs their personality to match whoever they're with, the partner who needs constant contact. They don't realize their neediness broadcasts an unspoken message. I am not complete unto myself. And here's the painful truth Jung uncovered. People may pity or tolerate the chronically insecure, but they never truly respect them. Respect requires boundaries, and boundaries require comfort with solitude. When you can't bear your own company, you inevitably violate others' space, mistaking their patience for permission to encroach. The remedy isn't isolation, but what Jung called sacred solitude, deliberate, uncompromising time where you turn off the noise and turn toward yourself. Start with small but radical acts. Eat a meal without distractions, take walks without headphones, sit with a journal when anxiety pushes you to text someone for validation. At first, this will feel like withdrawal symptoms from an addiction, because that's essentially what it is. But gradually, something miraculous happens. As you become a witness to your own thoughts rather than a fugitive from them, you develop what Jung termed inner solidity. This transformation changes how you relate to everyone. You stop clinging because you're no longer afraid of your own emptiness. You attract rather than chase, because your presence comes from overflow, not lack. And ironically, the more comfortable you become alone, the more magnetic you become in company, not because you've learned some social trick, but because you've finally become someone worth being alone with. This completes our journey through Jung's 7 habits, but understanding them is only the beginning. The real work, the alchemical transformation, happens in the space between knowing and doing, between insight and embodiment. Habit 7. Overintellectualizing emotions. Carl Jung recognized a dangerous modern tendency, our attempt to analyze our way out of emotions rather than experience our way through them. In a world that prizes rationality above all, we've developed what Jung called a tyranny of the intellect, where we dissect our feelings as if they were math problems to be solved rather than messages to be heard. This creates a peculiar kind of self-alienation. We become brilliant explainers of our inner world yet complete strangers to its actual terrain. The colleague who can articulate 3 psychological reasons for their anger but can't actually feel it, the partner who logically understands their grief but won't allow themselves to cry, these aren't examples of emotional mastery, but of emotional bypassing. And while this might make us feel temporarily safe, it comes at a devastating cost to our ability to connect and be respected as fully human. When we chronically intellectualize our emotions, we don't appear more rational to others, we appear distant, untrustworthy, even robotic. People sense the disconnect between our words and our embodied experience. Think of the leader who delivers a heartfelt speech with perfect rhetoric but no genuine emotion in their voice. Their words may be technically correct, but they land with all the impact of a dictionary. This happens because human beings are exquisitely tuned to detect authenticity not through what we say, but through the thousand subtle physiological cues, micro-expressions, vocal tones, body language, that our carefully constructed intellectual defenses can never fully mask. The paradox is that by trying to appear perfectly composed, we often come across as less trustworthy than if we simply allowed our humanity to show. The path forward isn't abandoning reason for uncontrolled emotional outbursts, but developing what Jung termed the transcendent function, the ability to hold both thinking and feeling in creative tension. Begin by practicing emotional labeling without analysis. When a strong emotion arises, before reaching for explanations, simply name it. This is grief. This is anxiety. Then, crucially, locate where you feel it physically, the tightness in your chest, the heat in your face. This grounds emotions in your body rather than letting them spiral endlessly in your mind. Next, develop what Jung called symbolic capacity. Express the emotion through creative channels like drawing, movement, or metaphor before attempting to logically understand it. Over time, you'll discover that emotions processed this way don't cloud judgment but actually sharpen it, providing intuitive insights that pure logic could never uncover. The transformation here is subtle but profound. You'll notice people leaning in when you speak, not because you've become more dramatic, but because you've become more real. Your presence will carry a new weight, not the artificial heaviness of forced seriousness, but the natural gravity of someone who isn't at war with their own humanity. And in this integration lies perhaps the most counterintuitive truth of all, that true emotional maturity looks less like perfect control and more like graceful fluency, the ability to navigate life's currents without either drowning in them or pretending they don't exist. Yet even this emotional integration remains incomplete if we haven't confronted what Jung saw as the foundation of all neurosis, our terror of being alone with the very self we've worked so hard to understand. Carl Jung left us with perhaps the most concise summary of personal transformation ever uttered. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. These 7 habits we've examined aren't mere behaviors to modify. They're alarm clocks ringing in the depths of your psyche, each one inviting you to wake up from the trance of unconscious living. The respect you've been seeking externally was never out there to begin with. It's been waiting all along in the unlit corners of yourself you've been avoiding. Every moment you spend blaming, performing, or hiding from your shadow is another moment spent dreaming. The awakening begins the second you choose to turn the gaze inward. Now comes the crucial question, the one that separates passive viewers from those ready to transform. Which of these 7 habits have you recognized in yourself most vividly? Is it the subtle projections poisoning your relationships? The exhausting mask of people-pleasing? The victim story you've outgrown but keep retelling? Name it in the comments, not as a confession, but as your first act of reclaiming power. Your words create accountability, and accountability breeds change. If this exploration of Jung's wisdom has struck a chord, you're not alone. Thousands are waking up to these psychological truths daily. Subscribe and turn on notifications because we're just scratching the surface. Next week we'll dive into Jung's 5 unspoken rules for magnetic presence, where we'll move from removing what holds you back to installing what will propel you forward. Until then, remember, respect isn't taken or given, it's uncovered, like a statue hidden within marble, waiting for you to chip away everything that isn't it. The chisel is in your hands.